Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Corey, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Churn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled The Startup's Guide to Customer Success. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be available 24 hours after this webinar. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Questions tab on your webinar console, and we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter today, Jennifer Chiang. Jennifer is the head of customer success at Sesso. She is also the author of the book titled The Startup's Guide to Customer Success, How to Champion the Customer for Your Company. You can purchase your own copy on Amazon, and I would recommend that you check it out. Jennifer also told me that yesterday was the 3-year anniversary of that book, so fitting time to be doing this webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Super excited to be talking to you guys today about customer success and what it looks like at startups. So, as Corey said, my name is Jennifer, and I am the author of the Amazon bestseller, The Startup's Guide to Customer Success, which, as Corey said, celebrated its 3-year anniversary just yesterday. I'm also head of customer success at CISO, and before CISO, I was the head of customer success at Yap. All of them are startups. So, I am a veteran of the startup world, specializing in early stage startups. So that's your pre-seed, your seed stage, Series A, Series B startups. And oftentimes, you can find me consulting at early stage companies and startup accelerators to help folks kind of build their customer success function so that they can bring in and more importantly, retain customers. I've created customer success teams from zero multiple times and helped to reorganize, refocus, refresh customer success organizations to help them get back on track. Of course, through all of this work, you probably, as you guys all know, as startups, wear multiple hats. So I've been responsible for sales motions, owning support functions, building internal data infrastructures, startup life. I am currently based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, but have lived about half of my life on the East Coast and a few years overseas as well. So now that you guys have gotten to know a little bit more about me, I do have a quick poll to get to know you guys a little bit better. So if we can put up the poll. So we'd love to hear, who do we have today?
Give it a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So it looks like, yeah, most customer success managers, and then secondly, head of customer success.
I love it. This is amazing. I love that. Now let's go to our next question.
So our next poll is, how many startups do we have here today? Give it just a minute. Okay, share out the results. I don't think I'm that surprised by the results given the topic.
Love it. Oh, this is so great. And I love that all of you guys, 80% of you guys are working at startups, and even the 20% of you guys that don't work at a startup but are just excited about the space. We're going over some key customer success fundamentals here today, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things you can still take away from here. All right, well, let's go back to our lovely presentation. Next slide. All right, so today we'll be talking all about customer success. After all, a lot of you guys work at startups, so that's why we're here. First, a little bit more about why this matters. Next, a little bit more about the customer success mindset. You probably have heard of that a couple of times, as well as the first steps to get started. So that includes how to diagnose your current onboarding and implementation processes, as well as any common mistakes that I've normally seen. And then we'll also end our time today with some Q&A. But feel free to put any and all questions that you may have in the chat or in the questions tab as you think of them. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, let's ground ourselves in why this matters and why customer success, customer experience, or just caring about the customer really matters. So in the last 10 years or so, there has actually been a dramatic shift in customer expectations in how we approach purchases, but not only in our personal lives, but also in the business settings. So, customer, as it says here, customers no longer just buy things, they are requiring an experience. And what do I mean by this? Well, I mean, for example, when I go to the store to buy a vacuum, in the past, I might just go to the store, find a vacuum, and found one that I thought was good enough and just bought the vacuum. But now, customers do so much more research before, during, and after the purchase. So, funnily enough, I experienced this just earlier this year when my partner and I were trying to find the best vacuum possible. And I think we watched about 2 hours of YouTube videos of people just trying out different vacuums. Then we looked at a bunch of different ratings and reviews and blogs. And then at the store itself, we were looking at the color and the feel and whether that actually fit our expectations. And then after the purchase, you open the box, the brown box on the outside, and you find this prettier inner box with a welcome card that had clear instructions with pictures and a phone number for a customer service rep, and of course, an ask to leave a review and join our newsletter and community online. That is all to say, what a difference from when we all first started in just like walking down the store and looking at the 5 vacuum options that the store had and called it a day. And stories like these, even though that's a story about a physical product, a vacuum, are actually a lot more standard, even for service product, even for the SaaS industry. And this is all playing into that strategy of customer experience. And the data backs this up as well. Oops, one slide too many. So we see here that 75% of businesses have actually named customer experience and success as a top priority. 86% of buyers have said that they would choose a better customer experience, even if it meant that they were paying more. And customer experience has been researched to surpass product and price as key brand differentiators. With stats like these, for companies and businesses like ours and startups like ours, that means that we don't have any wiggle room and to kind of help these customers, because this is what customers are very much expecting. And so if we don't give them that, we'll be at a significant disadvantage. And I think Dana Niv summarizes this quite well. She says, today's B2B customers feel empowered. They demand a whole new level of customer focus, expecting companies to know them personally, recognize their challenges, and cater to their needs. And though her quote here is for B2B, I also think this applies to B2C products, services, and everything in between. So that might beg the question, what are customers expecting now? Well, they're expecting 4 things. The first is flawless onboarding. And we'll dive deeper into this a little bit more later. But essentially, customers want to get started at their pace and on their signal. We see this, we see the use of tech touch customer success to help support even high touch customer success in situations here. So you've probably have seen more guided walkthroughs or the use of tool tips and more technologies these days. And especially in the enterprise customer success space, just to make sure that everything is as smooth as possible. After all, when people feel like they can do it themselves with as little help as possible, they feel like your service or your product is easy to use and simple to understand, even when it's actually super complex behind the curtain. Number 2 is a quick signal of a positive and non-trivial return on investment. So, customers want to know early on that the product is worth their time in the long run. This is kind of referring to the idea of minimizing time to value, or TTV. You may have heard of that here and there, but essentially it means how much time does it take from purchase to when the customer feels the value. I think number 2 kind of extends it a little bit more to when the customer can get a signal of a positive, non-trivial return on their investment. That relief that they know that they're in the right place and everything's going to work and that they're on their way to reach their goal. The third thing is that they're expecting to easy to find and easy to understand help when they need it. So essentially, if customers ever have any issues, they probably want an easy answer right then and there, so that they don't have to context switch, as often in our busy lives. And you guys have probably experienced this to some extent as well. The most annoying thing for me is like if I'm heads down really working on something and I run into a little snag, and then I have to figure out, okay, let me go open up a separate tab in Google, figure out who I need to get in touch with, copy that support email address, go to my email, type it out, figure out what my issue is, hit send, and then maybe wait 24 hours for a response. And that for me is like not the easiest experience. But remember, every single touch point that the customer has here is part of their customer success story. You might have thought of like, oh, well, that's support. No, actually, this is all part of this customer success story. The last thing here is that they're expecting a top-of-the-line customer service experience. So, if customers need any additional assistance, this would be seamless and flawless. Things should be clear and concise and communicated in a way that they understand, almost like royalty, for better or for worse. And so now with this slide, we kind of understand more about why this is important. So now I'm going to go into what goes into executing these 4 things, or even just one of these things for our clients. So the first thing is just understanding the basics. So what is customer success? I know I've been throwing around this term a little bit, but it's helpful to kind of just like understand. So first, customer success is the process of anticipating customer challenges or questions and proactively providing them solutions and the answers to those issues prior to them arising. Essentially, understanding your customer is key so that you can help proactively anticipate those challenges and address them up front. We've also seen that over the past decade or so, customer success has gone from fancy customer support or account management to really a customer philosophy. And previously, and still a bit to this day, the term customer success can feel like just a department, but it's actually become more and more a company philosophy as a business. And a lot of people are realizing out there that if they tap into this, they can actually unlock a lot of huge businesses opportunities. And I'll talk about more of this later. I think Zakir here does a really great job of summarizing how having a proper customer success function can differentiate your company. He says, we've overinvested in customer success early, and we use that to differentiate ourselves. However, I will note that investing in customer success early isn't straightforward nor easy. So actually I want to do another quick poll to understand, what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing today?
Giving it some time as give people to read through the options. Okay, give it one more second. Okay. Looks like people fell all over in each of the challenges. Too many things to do, not enough time. Number 1 answer.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, spoiler alert, I actually faced all of these challenges before. So this is all normal. And I, to this day, too many things to do, not enough time is always something that comes up over and over again. So I completely agree. Let's go ahead and go back to our lovely slides. And then, kind of to echo kind of what you guys just said, too many things to do and not enough time. I was like you. When I first started in customer success, I was lost and overwhelmed. There's a lot of resources out there about customer success, and especially back when I started in 2015, there was a bunch of resources that weren't really for me. And maybe some of you guys have shared the same feelings. Back then, I'd read about these customer playbooks, but I wouldn't be able to implement them because I was working with hundreds and thousands of customers on a simple Google spreadsheet. Like I didn't have time for that. Or I'd read about these fancy systems that could help power my data, but I didn't have the team nor the budget to warrant such huge investments. Or I'd read about having different types of CSMs and implementation managers, and I thought, oh, geez, I'm a team of one. And I think for me, it was a really frustrating experience, which is why I ended up writing the book, and we're having conversations like this today around why customer success is so important, how even as super small businesses that are 1 day old, you can still achieve a lot of these things. So, after hundreds of conversations, and what I've realized is that regardless if you're just starting your customer success function today, or if you're 10 years into your customer success career at a startup, the key to customer success is focus. And it kind of goes back to the too many things to do, not enough time that most of you guys are feeling. But I think there's really three main things that early customer success teams should just focus on. And I would do this in this order. So the first thing is to understand your charter. So what this means is really understanding what is the purpose of your team. The second is early customer success teams should focus on championing the customer. This means you should get buy-in from your leadership as well as the company around the power of the customer success. And the third thing to focus on is that you want to have a complete customer experience. How are you planning to wow your customers and create evangelists in the long term? So I know this is a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and dive into each of these in more detail. So the first thing is understanding your charter, or simply put, what is the purpose of your team? And in my book, I talk about a simple framework to help any team determine this, which the management consultant in me has plotted in a 2x2 matrix. On one axis, we have what I call product complexity. This is referring to how complex your product is for your customer to use. So for example, Salesforce, I would say, is a higher in product complexity. There's even special roles out there for Salesforce administrators and Salesforce engineers because this is just such a complex product to use and implement. And I think an example of something that is lower in product complexity is like a document tracking system. Again, this is not to say that they're not simple in the back end, but it is simple for the user to use and understand. So I know as a user, if I'm using a document tracking system, I have a document, it tracks how many views and clicks there are, much simpler than Salesforce. Going back to our chart, we see that on the other axis, we have our user complexity. So that kind of refers to how deeply or emotional your product impacts your customer. So for example, in like a picture retouching tool, that has a lower user complexity because if, say, the service goes down, I can probably wait or hack a workaround before posting on Instagram. However, like a product that's like a dog walking service, for example, has a much higher user complexity because if anything were to happen to that dog, the dog ate something, that could have, hurt him, the customer would be incredibly upset and would want to know immediately. So after you kind of figure out, and reflect a little bit more about product complexity and user complexity at your company, you'll go ahead and go to this matrix and kind of see what your charter is. So either automate, revolutionize, simplify, or delight. In my book, I also include this fun quiz that you can take to see kind of where your company falls in this matrix if you don't want to do the reflection yourself. I've also heard CS teams have all their CSMs complete the quiz together and kind of see where their consensus lies, which is kind of fun. To kind of go through each of these 4 quadrants, for companies that are kind of high in both product and user complexity, so that top right-hand corner, the customer success team's focus is to revolutionize. And what I mean by that is to really revolutionize the way that folks think about the problem that your product will help solve and really guide them through that journey. So in these cases, your user will often make significant changes to their day-to-day life to better understand how your product works or just to even use it properly. So, thinking like Salesforce, for example. But if everything is successful, you've made a huge impact on their life and they will be incredibly thankful. But because, to that line, because the users are also very emotionally invested, if anything goes wrong, they'll feel defeated. So, the system goes down, they implemented something, they changed the setting on something by accident, and it just doesn't work anymore, they'll just feel, kind of locked up. So this is kind of where you really need to have a lot of investment up front to give them that support and guidance that they need in order to kind of revolutionize their thinking. For companies that are not high in product complexity but have high user complexity, so that bottom right-hand corner, the customer success team's focus is then to delight. So, how to delight your customers so they feel valued and taken care of. Your users are trusting you with something that is dear to them. So a pet, their emails, their finances. So while your product is easy to use and probably doesn't need a lot of hand holding, customers here will be extremely sensitive if anything goes awry. So on the flip side, users here will also be very receptive and enthusiastic when things go well. So that's why it's all about delighting. And then for our top left-hand corner, those high in product complexity and lower in user complexity, our team focus is then to automate. It's kind of really automate those headaches that your customers may have, just so they can be more efficient. You know, the user here has clearly indicated that there's probably a significant need for your services, and therefore is likely to put in the effort. But once that effort is put in, they're most likely want to just free up some time and to do more high priority tasks. And then last but certainly not least, for companies that are lower in product complexity and low in product complexity and low in user complexity, so that bottom left-hand corner, we see the customer success team's focus is to simplify. So really simplifying your customers' lives by making things easy to understand and process. You know, demonstrate value early and then get out of the way. And, you know, oftentimes what we see here is that, you know, there could be some challenges when it comes to engagement, but it's pretty simple and straightforward in that sense. I'm going to end this slide by just saying there's two common mistakes when I see people using this matrix. I think the first thing is that folks forget to put themselves in the shoes of the customer when they're thinking about the product and user complexities. So remember, the product and user complexities are in the eyes of the customer, not you. So just because you think your product is easy to use, it doesn't necessarily mean your customers would agree with that. The second mistake that I also see is that, you know, people forget that this is a little bit more of a spectrum. So if you have something that's, you know, medium user complexity, but definitely high product complexity, then maybe you're taking playbooks from both the automate and revolutionize quadrants. Of course, I go into more detail in my book about each of these things, but I hope this kind of overview helps you make clear decisions on how you can best help your customers. Once you kind of understood your charter, your focus, the second focus is to champion the customer. And this kind of boils down to two things. First is executive buy-in, and then overall team buy-in. Of course, the more people that you have, the tougher this is. But if you are a one-woman shop, this still needs to be done, even along with sharing this with every single contractor and stakeholder that you're working with. So, why is executive buy-in important? Because if your leadership team doesn't fully understand the power behind customer success and the potential that it has, it's going to be really tough for you to get the resources and leverage that you need to help customers succeed. I think Emily Hayes puts this well in this quote. She says, "Show your executive how it could have been different if only someone had been paying closer attention. Don't focus on the loss, show the potential." And executives have been buying in. There's a 2015 survey that shows that 70% of CEOs are now in support of customer success, and that number is continuing to grow. And I think one of the primary power drivers with executive buy-in is that you can also work cross-departmentally much more smoothly when everyone is going to the same drum beat. So, for example, one of the teams that you're probably working very closely with is the product and engineering teams. And this is, where collaborative communication plays a huge role in the success of customer success and product management. So if you have that buy-in higher up, not only is that, you're able to then have alignment between, in terms of customer centricity between product and customer success, but you can also better manage expectations with the customer and really create that strong bond and trust between the business and the customer. Of course, this is just one of many cross-departmental examples of when buy-in is really important and how it can really multiply your efforts in the long run. Another huge part of championing the customer is really evangelizing the customer-centric mindset, which we talked a little bit about earlier. And to quote my book, to flourish, customer success must become the company mindset to unlock the business' biggest opportunity in business. So, I started alluding to this in the previous slide with the product team example, but when your customer success becomes the mindset within your company, not only will customers be able to tell the difference, but you will too. And why? Because when there is this mindset, when you are in the room, so say there's like a product feature prioritization meeting, or maybe a marketing value proposition meeting, even when you aren't in the room, there's always someone there to be championing the customer. And just like think about that. That is just so powerful. And especially for those who are teams of one out there, it means that you can still have a strong customer success function and a strong customer success mindset among your company and still thrive. Remember, you don't have to have the title of customer success to have a customer success mindset. I think in so many discussions I've had with startups and accelerators, I've seen those companies that have truly embraced this mindset are those that flourish, and the ones that don't tend to struggle a little bit more to even find product market fit when their product is amazing. So this may sound super obvious at this point, but I think this is much easier said than done. And I have worked with a number of companies that have said, they put the customer first, but it was a lot more talk than action. So I know this is tough. And I think startup executives and teams in general are searching for product market fit in the early days and are thinking about like funding and all these other things. So it's really up to the customer success function to remind them about the customer and the power of customer in their company storytelling. Lastly, once you've understood your charter and have really championed the customer and gotten the buy-in needed, the third focus is to architect a complete customer experience. And this is complete in the sense that it's end-to-end, not in the sense that it's perfect, but it's sure that it's sure to make sure that this is an iterative process. So I think Christian York summarizes this well when he says, if you want to stand out from the 83 other people your client interacts with on a day-to-day basis, then you must maintain a high level of geniality, even in the most insignificant of interactions. So we need to be looking at the customer journey holistically, from the very beginning of what ad they see, or as early as possible, all the way to the point when they refer their friends after they've been with you for years. And by doing so, you can not only make sure that this flows all well, but also keep notes of what areas may need more attention. And, all of this is all about developing that trusted advisor relationship with the customer, showing the customers that you truly care. You might hear about customer journey mapping, which is around this stage as well, to create alignment across teams. And then you might have some very, very simple if this, then that playbooks to make sure that customers don't veer too off in their customer journey. All right. So now we have a rough idea of customer success as a philosophy. Let's go ahead and talk about gaining traction. So I know we just went from like the 30,000 level. Now let's get a bit closer to the 10,000 level. Still high level, but we're a bit more in the weeds because I do want to make sure that you guys have some more concrete takeaways. So we're going to start with the first steps. Those first moments when your company interacts with the customer and your product. So why talk about this now? Well, because in order for you to get traction, you need to care about the first moments. And research shows that this matters. 23% of people leave a service due to bad onboarding. 97% of consumers surveyed said they churned because they couldn't see the value in the first interaction. Of this number, 73% of them left within the first 5 minutes. And then improvements in the user's first 5 minutes can also drive 50% of increase in lifetime value. I mean, that's amazing. So we know that first moments matter, and you probably already have some sort of V1 of your implementation journey. But I also want to provide you a quick framework of how you can evaluate whether or not your first customer touch points are working for you. So 5 questions to ask yourself. Of course, every single company is different, so I'll start with that as well. The first one is, what is the objective of onboarding? Where I see folks getting lost here is that they always want to showcase all the amazing features that their engineers have built, and they sometimes overwhelm the customers. And by the end of the kickoff, you see the customer get foggy-eyed, and because they end up not remembering much because it was just too much to take in. So ask yourself, what do you want folks to take away from the first moments of interacting with your service? And is what you're doing so far accomplishing that? How can you set up your customers for success to use your product so that they feel like it's easy and they can refer to their peers to use? So for example, if the objective of onboarding is to get them to log in or determine where they're stuck during your onboarding consultation, then you probably shouldn't be spending the first moments of your time together about the renewal process or whatever happens on step 25 of the process. The second question that maybe you guys should be asking is, what is your customer's mindset during onboarding? It kind of goes back to that 2x2 matrix that I was talking about before, where people are coming, where people are coming from and when they interact with your product. So, for example, I was working with this lovely lady who was creating better experiences for older women to be less scared to use internet tools. Her clientele's mindset kind of going into onboarding was just filled with so much anxiety and, to some extent, some shame that they spent a good chunk of their first hour, that she spends a good chunk of her first hour with her clients, just really getting to know them. And she did this because she fully understood where her customer was coming from and what mindset they're coming in from during those first moments of interacting with her business. The third question that you might be asking yourself is, what type of onboarding does your customer need? So different customers and different types of customers obviously have different needs, and this includes onboarding needs. So for example, say you're selling cars, hence the picture. There are customers probably like me who go in, want to meet the salesperson, want to look at the cars, want to look at all the different types of cars, want to look at the manual and really understand everything about the car before I even step foot into the car. And then you have other people, like a lot of my friends, who just kind of walk into the dealership, don't even need a hi or hello, just points at the car and wants the keys and turns on the radio and is ready to go. So those two types of customers are very, very different car buying experiences. And so, for example, if the salesperson is like, okay, what will work for both, and tries to figure out what onboarding experience works for both, perhaps brochure, you give a brochure to me, and I'll just be like, I don't know what to do with this. This is not enough information. I'm still anxious. And you give a brochure to the other person who just wants to go get the keys and go, they'll probably just throw it away. So you can see how that onboarding experience actually does not work. So by realizing that if you have two different types of customers, you want to make sure that you're giving that onboarding experience that matches what the customer needs. The fourth question is to really understand what your plans are to make your onboarding better. So onboarding plans are never just set it and leave it. It needs to be a continuous iteration, and really understanding what your team's plans are to reflect and iterate, whether that is using data or qualitative stories from talking to your first customers. It's really important to make sure that you have a healthy onboarding journey. Oftentimes there's just so many things happening around us that we don't focus on, reflecting. We might miss some of the big changes that, can really make or break our onboarding experience. So those who forget to ask this question can often get stuck, can often feel like they're quote unquote stuck in the process. And it makes it really hard to stay nimble and adjust yourself to what your customers actually need. Then the last question, but definitely not least, is, are you overcomplicating it? I think what's so funny is that I go through all these 4 questions, and I'm sure you're thinking of a lot of different ideas that can help your company, but don't overcomplicate it. And sometimes it's in our nature to overcomplicate things because they make sense to us. But sometimes I've talked with folks where when they talk about their first touch points with the customer, they tell this elaborate plan of how to get a customer started. And what we found was that they're just too much, and they're often tripping over themselves. And that's actually not an experience that you want to give yourself, your team, or your customers. So keep it simple, not only for yourself, but also for your customers as well. So to kind of recap, the 5 questions you should be asking yourself at the beginning of your customer acquisition journey is number 1, what is the objective of your onboarding? What is your customer's mindset during onboarding? What type of onboarding does your customer need? What are your plans to make onboarding better? And are you overcomplicating it? And in the next section, we're going to start closing out by talking about some common mistakes I've seen, but I also want, so common mistakes I've seen. So after the first step, so you start thinking a lot more about your onboarding process. And I also often get the question, what are common mistakes? So there are 3 common mistakes that I've seen when it comes to early customer success organizations. The first one is not starting early enough. And really not thinking about the customer success on day 0 means that it's going to be much harder to get buy-in and to build that customer-centric mindset among the company, especially as you create more and more processes. Note how I did not say that you need to have a title of customer success to start thinking about customer success. So those founders on our call today. So anyone can really do this, and even if it eventually grows into a second team. The next thing that I see is that folks just think about it once and then they forget to think about it again. So again, customer success is a mindset, not a checkbox. So this is something that is continuous and must have constant effort. Customers, as I've mentioned earlier, have higher and higher expectations of all of us and require us to be constantly thinking one step ahead. And to double click on this a little bit more, one of the common ways that the second mistake manifests itself is seeing teams that just rename their customer support as customer success. Those are 2 completely different functions, and we really need to be a lot more, thoughtful about the entire process. Then the last mistake that I'll call out today is we get tired about beating the customer drum. Being the customer advocate can be tough and thankless at times. However, it really does pay off in huge ways for your customers and for yourself and for your team later on. So to get out of this trap, really vary the mediums of how you evangelize customers. So for example, if you use data dashboards a lot versus customer stories in Slack versus having non-customer success people in customer calls, vary it up sometimes to make sure that you're keeping things interesting and you're still having different ways and different channels to really beat that customer drum. All right, so now that we've talked a lot about how to get your customer success function kind of from 0 to 1, in the last part of my presentation, I want to talk to you a little bit more about how you guys can plan for scale. Back when I was first starting to scale my customer success team, there was like 2 main things that I looked at. First was fail fast, learn faster. As startups, the 80% of us here today, we have the power of adaptability and quick decision making at our startups, and we should be using that nimbleness to our advantage. Essentially by figuring out your charter and your objective, you can have quicker learning loops and iterate faster when things are working or not working. The second is to supercharge your team with tech efficiently. And typically there's like kind of 4 main things, tech functions that you want to cover here. First is the CRM, so ability to manage accounts. Second is email automation, so ability to automate success. Third is data visualization, ability to understand trends. And the last one is a self-service help center, so ability for customers to get quick help. Sometimes you'll find tech that does all of these things, or just some of these things, or just one of these things. But these are all 4 things that you probably need. But I will say that this is kind of the state of the world 5 to 10 years ago. And it is important that we continue to push this forward. And as Catherine Blackmore said, it's really time to marry our customer data with programs, technology, and automation. So really now in 2022, can't believe it's already 2022, we can do exactly just that. And there's so many new customer success technologies and low-cost, flexible options for customer success platforms and customer success in general. Back when I first started in customer success, I personally had experiences with tech that weren't made for startups, but now there's a lot more choices. From tech that just focuses on making your sales handoff more smooth to fully startup-friendly customer success platforms. And I know that especially when you're small, it can be a little daunting to implement stuff like this at first. But it really is important to stay alert and stay on top of this, especially as leaders, so that you can really help your teams and your customers. So really don't sleep about these things when you're thinking about tech. And when it comes to choosing your customer success tech stack, I think there's 3 important things to consider. So I'll kind of share them now. So the first thing is, 1, what is your current process? 2, what does your team need? And 3, what does your customers value? And I can repeat that. So 1, what is your current process? 2, what does your team need? And 3, what does your customer value? And I can do a quick blurb on each of these actually. So the first one is, what is your current process? So it is important that we feel and we understand and feel comfortable with our processes and know that it works. Too often do I see folks conforming to technology instead of having technology help them. And examples are this, of probably when you start seeing people, even outside of the customer success sphere, that say, oh, I can't do that for you because my system doesn't allow me to. Again, we want our technology to help empower us and to help our customers as much as we can. So the other reason why it's so important to feel comfortable in our processes is because if you don't know if your process is working, making it more efficient is it's a little bit of a gamble there for your organization. So for those customer success organizations that are still quite small, less than 5 people, you're probably still getting to know your customer, understand what resonates and what doesn't. So your focus at that point should be figuring out and strategizing what you need out of the tech instead of really implementing the tech just yet. But essentially, don't put the cart before the horse. But again, don't sleep on it too much. These are things that can really help your team. The second thing to consider, going back to the 3 things, is really understanding what your team needs. So we've probably all experienced that problem on our phones when we have too many apps on our phones and we end up forgetting or underutilizing, half of them. So we don't want that problem to occur to our teams, especially when a new tech item is not only additional research and budget time, but also additional training and implementation time. So even before you start diving into the research, really understand your team's processes and understand what your biggest levers are to help your team. So for example, is it having more accessible data? Is it preparing for kickoff calls? Whatever it might be sure that whatever tech you're bringing on addresses a big need for your team. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, what is your customer value? So we talked a lot about process and what your team needs, but it's also important to understand what your customer values. So for example, we can have all the data visualization tools in the world, but if our customer just wants to understand how to reset their password, maybe we need to invest more in a tool that can help serve as a help center as well. And if our customers value, timely responses to urgent matters, perhaps finding a tool that can help CSMs manage those playbooks at scale will help CSMs become more proactive and hit those goals faster. Remember, whatever your customer is looking for, and thinking about that 2x2 matrix from earlier, we want to make sure that it is reflected in the tech so that you're always pushing customer objectives forward at all times. So again, that framework is, what is your current process, what does your team need, and what is your customer value? And then with those kind of 3 things, you can really go into tech research with a lot more clarity and confidence. And I really hope that framework kind of helps provide a better understanding of how to approach your tech stack, especially when you are a young company. All right, so I also want to make sure that we have time for questions. I know I covered a lot today in our conversation, and I also want to make sure that we're able to connect outside this webinar. My contact info is on the slide right here, and as well as links to my books, The Startup's Guide to Customer Success, are also above, and I would love connecting with folks on LinkedIn. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for some Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that presentation. So we have gotten a number of questions that have already come in, but I'd like to invite the rest of the audience to please go ahead and submit your questions, and we will get to as many as we can. So let me see. Our first question that we have says, any advice do you have for companies building out customer success playbooks from scratch? It can be tough to know where to start.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of remembering the whole, one of the first slides of the presentation is focus. What are you trying to achieve with the playbook, and how understanding like what is your current, where you currently are standing, like what is your playbook right now? Even if it's like all in your mind, can you write that down and understanding and use that as a version 1 to start editing and understanding what works and what doesn't work for the customer. So for example, if my playbook in my mind is 3 steps, I write those 3 steps down and see, oh, wow, actually step 2 doesn't even resonate with the customer. And half the time they're just, dozing off or checking their emails when I go over that step 2. Then maybe I need to figure out what to do next. I think what's really, really fun about customer success is that even though there are very key principles that we all kind of share, every single company is different, and that's why we have kind of the product complexity and the user complexity frameworks, is to really help us learn how to focus and learn how to better understand our customers. So there's no right answer, but I really recommend just like saying, what are you guys doing now? What isn't working? What is working? And just kind of start iterating from there.
Awesome. Let's see. Our next question is, so how do you go about assessing if you have a healthy onboarding journey? What are the things to look out for?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're asking yourself those 5 questions that I shared earlier, that'll give you a pretty good sense of whether or not you have a healthy onboarding journey. Of course, there's also metrics that you can look at when it comes to, whether or not people are adopting your service, or are they dropping off after a week? Are they, reaching out to your support, channel very, very often afterwards? Little things like that can help give you signals. Though, and I know you didn't ask, but a little quick side note on metrics is also add some focus into your metrics as well. We can easily get bogged down in like hundreds of thousands of metrics if we wanted to, and sometimes we wish we had the time. But kind of going back to our poll, we don't have enough time to do all of that. So we want to make sure that we're focusing our efforts in 3 metrics when we're starting off, and eventually as our team grows bigger and our customer success team organization matures, ramp that up to 5 focus metrics, and then 10 focus metrics, and then so on and so forth.
Awesome. I think that makes sense. Our next question is, and we got a couple of questions around the handoff process, but one of them is, what do you think a great sales to CS handoff looks like? We have a high volume of new customers.
Well, that's great that you have a high volume of
Yeah.
new customers. That's super exciting. So when it comes to the sales handoff process, you want to make sure that everyone, first, everyone's sharing that customer-centric mindset. We're not 2 separate teams. We're all wearing the same jersey. And with that in mind, the best sales handoff process is really understanding everyone's goals and ultimately our company's and customers' goals. So what does CS need to know from sales to make sure that onboarding is as smooth as possible? Sometimes you don't need to know everything. Sometimes you only really need to know 20% of the things, and really help focus, what exactly do you need, and let sales know that. Of course, it's really helpful for CSMs to also have access to the full thing on their own if they want to do extra research, because sometimes there's also cases like for the more complex customers where you want to dive a little bit deeper. But to keep it easy, what do you really need to make sure onboarding goes well? What are the 3 things? Make sure sales knows to focus on those 3 things, and therefore it makes the handoff much simpler. I've seen people do meetings for handoffs. I recommend those for much more complex customers, but I've seen Slack messages working just fine. Really up to what you guys need and ultimately what your customers need.
Awesome. We have a question that says, what is your experience with combining customer success and support? There's a couple different questions that have come in around defining those roles. Someone even said that it doesn't seem to make sense to have split them out at their organization. So there's a couple different questions, but maybe if you could just touch on your experience of customer success and support and how they work together or their roles.
Yeah, so customer support is just such an important team. They have so much value and so much knowledge that I think we should make sure that we are working in lockstep with them. My experience at my last company, I was in charge of both success and support teams. And what made it really great is that I could really be that conduit to make sure that all the CSMs knew exactly, like, hey, we just got 10 tickets in the last hour about this one customer that you have, like, what's going on? And really making sure that those communication channels are open and, easy to understand and use. So I really do think that there's so much synergy between the 2. I actually really enjoyed having both of them under one umbrella. And that's just to make sure that the customer experience is especially post sales, is really smooth. but it really does depend on your post-sales structure. So for example, my last company, I was in charge of everything post-sales because it was just customer success and support, and that was everyone else was not really post-sales. Either like marketing or pre-sale or engineering or stuff like that. But my new company that I just started a couple of months ago, we actually have like 5 post-sale teams, which is very exciting. And this is where we have a customer success team, but we also share support, and we make sure that we are all in line with how we think about support and what support actually means. And we want to make sure that we are empowering our support teams as well. So I know that was a lot of different things there, but support is just such an incredibly important thing that we really need to make sure that we're in lockstep with them. And I think one last thing is I've talked to a lot of senior customer success leaders at much bigger companies, Series D, IPO'd, things like that, and they say that their CSMs are still handling some support requests, and it just doesn't go away sometimes. So don't feel like you have to have this red line in the sand that this is support, this is success. It's always going to be a little bit blurry, even when you get bigger. But just having those processes and having just a clear understanding within the team in place, and also for your customers, so they know who to reach out to. Just understand that, and you'll be set to go.
Awesome. We have a question that says, any advice on being the very first CS hire at a startup? I'm accepting a new role and looking for advice for coming in and getting off on a good foot with head of sales and other department heads.
Oh boy, well, congrats on your new role, or hopefully to be new role. That's really exciting. When it comes to being the very first CS hire, it wasn't your shoes not too long ago. It's really having a listening ear to everything and everyone. I basically dedicated my first entire month, and I took this advice from someone else who did something similar, where they were their first CS role, or they were the first senior CS role or whatever. Really take the time to listen. And oftentimes, especially if you're not the third person to be at the company, you are also going into a lot of processes that are already in place. So you need to understand and respect them, and understand kind of where they're coming from, what their goals are, what are some of the gripes that they have about the current process, what do they want to do, what do they not want to do, what do they feel empowered to do. Really understand and dig deep and ask why throughout through the whole gambit, from product to marketing to whoever is kind of doing your CS role right now. Just really understand what's going on, so that when you kind of put your first step, kind of make your first playbook and stuff like that, you have a very clear idea of how your policies or procedures or processes really mesh with everyone else's. And also just have a good time. I think people always forget that building relationships is something that I love about the customer success organization, not only with customers, but within the entire team. So really have a good time getting to know folks, understanding what makes them excited and happy and sad and angry and frustrated, and just really understanding it all. So have fun.
I like that advice, focusing on understanding. We have a question that says, what items or areas do you recommend a team first focus on standardizing and documenting for a CS team?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to documenting, I think the best advice I've seen is just start. I think most people try to find is Notion better, Google Docs, is Wiki better, internal wikis, all this other stuff. It's no, even if it's a Slack message to yourself, start documenting things. And there's never, even if this is the first time you've ever done a process, start documenting it now, because it's so much easier to edit than it is to write something from scratch. So it's the very first time you're hiring a new CSM. Start documenting. What did you do first? How did you create the JD? Well, how did you post the JD? So that when you're ready to start the second hire, you already have something in place, and you can start editing, being oh, that worked really well, or that didn't work really well. And it really helps kind of get the momentum going, and really setting that example for everyone else. And I will say, as a CS person in a bunch of startups, everyone loves it if you document things, product especially, and it's always good to have a good relationship with product.
Excellent. We've had a number of questions come in all about metrics. So curious if you could share what your kind of key metrics are for, starting out a CS team and what we should be looking for to see if you're performing and being successful.
Yeah, so I think what's so funny is that, and I think I talk about this in my book, but when I first started in customer success, my very first metric was referrals. I do not recommend that to anybody. It was something that is a rookie mistake. And I basically just, the reason why the customer success team was created was to increase referrals. Of course, that's all our end goals. But when you're first starting customer success, you shouldn't think about optimizing step 25 when you have no idea what step 1 is. And so what I always recommend folks, especially early on, is to, one, don't have a ton of metrics. Have 3 that you really focus on. And 2, make them earlier on in the process. So typically what I like to see is, 1, some sort of adoption metric. So, how do you make sure that folks are getting onto your platform and getting onto your platform. The second thing is some sort of engagement metric. How do you know that folks are still using it kind of time after time, after the first week, after the second week, after the first month? And the third thing is, how do you know that folks are coming back? So like, what's that commitment that they're making? So typically that you see this as renewals or something like that. I will say when you're first starting out in customer success, having an eye on those first 3 metrics is good. But then I would put more focus on the earlier metrics, because if people aren't onboarding, let me tell you, they're probably not renewing. So I would put a lot more focus there. Another thing I'll also add to that is, don't also feel free to put, I call it graduating from metrics. So for example, for my adoption metric, I can say my very first version is having people sign on to the platform. I want to make sure that, if only 20% of people are signing on right now, I want to make sure that gets to 80, 90% before I feel or whatever percentage it is, depending on your product, before I feel comfortable graduating. And that graduation could be maybe after they sign in, they have to, click 2 buttons. And then, so I want to see then my next adoption metric after I've graduated from people signing in could be how many folks click those 2 buttons. Because I know that if they click those 2 buttons, they're set up for success. Or, how many people, so I think to use a more concrete example, I'm assuming a lot of people here use Slack. So my first adoption metric could be, did you sign on to Slack? Like, have you signed on? You made your little tag that says @Jen or whatever. And then I might graduate from that to say, how many people have sent their first message? Because that's harder, but that's the next side. And then I want to then maybe graduate from that to be, how many people joined at least 3 channels? Anything like that. And so you can really graduate and make your metrics more and more useful as goals and as North Stars. But also just like to really help you understand what's really going on in the business. So that's a little bit about metrics.
I like that. We've also had a number of questions come in about engaging with customers and driving adoption. So I'll pick one. It says, sometimes it's hard to keep customers engaged in our product. Do you have any advice specifically, since everyone seems so busy?
Yeah, oh boy. I guess this is kind of going back to that matrix of, user complexity, product complexity. Sometimes I don't want 2,000 notifications, from my like tea kettle. Like, that's just not necessary, because I kind of use it to set it and forget it sort of thing. So really understanding what our place is. But of course, when it comes to engaging and, getting those open rates up and response rates up, it really comes down to understanding your customer, how they communicate. So for example, I was working with a company where they were sending out emails that were really useful. They had decent open rates. There wasn't really a CTA. So they didn't know how to make it better. They were just like, I hope our customers read it. But then once they added a CTA, they were able to really understand if people understood and took in the content. And then the other thing they realized was that their emails were 3 paragraphs long, and no one had time to read all those 3 paragraphs. So they started using, bullet points, bolding, highlighting, all these little tips and tricks, and they started seeing response rates, go through the roof because of that, because they were able to really cater to the customer and what the customer needs. There are times when customers want those paragraphs. I'm thinking about those legal things that they want to make sure they dot their I's and, cross their T's and stuff like that. But you're really just understanding, what does your customer need? Which it could be, maybe it's not email, maybe it's text. I mean, that's a huge trend I'm seeing happening as well. Or push notifications, anything like that. Like really understand what is your customer looking for and why, to really get those response rates up.
Excellent. Well, we are at the end of our time today, so I wanted to thank you again and remind everyone that we are sending out a link to this recording tomorrow. At the end of this webinar, a survey will pop up, and we'd appreciate if you would just take a moment before logging off to provide your feedback. And thanks again for joining us, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.